Morning, Y10. This is Miss Holly here. I hope you're all doing well today. So far this week, you've done an awful lot of work focusing on characters. You've looked at your impressions of the witches, of Macbeth, and in our last lesson together, we focused strongly on Lady Macbeth and what our first impressions are of her in her first key scene. Today, to round off the week, we're going to keep up our character focus, but in a slightly different way. We're going to be looking at the relationship between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, which is a really important one as we go through the play, because Lady Macbeth is such a strong influence on Macbeth, and really has a great influence on magic into the play. So in our lesson today, we're going to be looking to answer this question. How does Act 1, Scene 7 present Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's relationship? To do that, we're going to watch the RSC production of this scene. We're then going to focus on two important speeches, one by Macbeth, one by Lady Macbeth, and think about what these speeches are revealing about each of these characters. We're then going to focus on three key quotes and use those quotes to develop ideas about what Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's relationship is actually like. And finally, we'll touch briefly on some possibilities for why Macbeth eventually decides to kill Duncan at the end of the scene. So, I'm going to briefly summarise what happens in this scene before we watch the production. Remember yesterday we were focusing on Act 1, Scene 5, which was when Macbeth and Lady Macbeth meet for the first time after the battle, and Lady Macbeth takes control of the entire plan of Duncan. Macbeth doesn't speak a great deal during this scene, and while Lady Macbeth passionately talks about how they're going to take the throne for themselves, he doesn't actually agree. He simply says, "We will speak about this further." Now in Act 1, Scene 6, King Duncan arrives at the castle, and Lady Macbeth turns out, playing the gracious host, and greets him as an honoured and valued guest. We know she's being, but it really plays up Duncan as an innocent and her as the talented manipulator. As we go back to Scene 7, we essentially have Macbeth and Lady Macbeth picking up the conversation that they started in Scene 5. Macbeth is pacing by himself at the start of this scene, thinking about the plan to kill Duncan and take the throne. So in some ways, Scene 7 is a mirror of Scene 5. In Scene 5, we saw Lady Macbeth speaking aloud by herself at the start of the scene, and then saw Macbeth and Lady Macbeth together. Whereas in this scene, we're going to get some access to Macbeth's thoughts before we see them talking together. So Macbeth is thinking to himself about the plan. He says that the deed would actually be quite easy for him, but only if he could be certain that he'd avoid the terrible consequences that he fears might arise. He then considers his reasons quite logically to kill Duncan, and he realises that his only real reason to kill him is his own ambition and lust for power. Lady Macbeth then enters, and Macbeth declares flat out that he's not going to kill Duncan. Lady Macbeth is absolutely outraged by this, and starts to insult him, calling him a coward and questioning his entire masculine identity. Then she tells him the details of her plan. While Duncan sleeps, she will give his chamberlains wine to make them sleep. This is so that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth can slip in and kill Duncan themselves. They'll then smear blood on the sleeping chamberlains, framing them for murder. Macbeth then agrees to proceed with the murder, and the scene closes. So I'm going to bring up the scene in full. While you're watching, I'd like you to think about the relationship between these two and how it's presented on the stage. How is Macbeth acting when he's alone? Does that change at all when Lady Macbeth enters? And at the end of the scene, do you think he's actually convinced by Lady Macbeth's arguments?
Silence! If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with his surcease success, that but this blow might be the be-all and end-all here. But here, upon this bank and shoal of time, we jump the life to come. But in these cases, we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instruction, which being taught returns to plague the inventor. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poison chalice to our own lips. He's here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. Then, as his host, who should against his murderers shut the door, not bear the knife myself. This Duncan hath borne his faculties so neat, hath been so clear in his great office that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off. And pity, like a naked newborn babe striding the blast, O heaven's cherubim, forced upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall glow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. We have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, only faulty ambition, which all leaps itself and falls on the other.
He hath almost supped. Why have you left the chamber?
But he has for me.
No, not he has.
We will proceed no further in this business. He hath honoured me of late, and I have bought golden opinions from all sorts of people, which would be worn now in their newest gloss, not cast aside so soon.
Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? Hath it slept since? And wakes it now to look so green and pale as what it did so freely? From this time, such I account thy love. Art thou afeard to be the same in thine own act and valour as thou art in desire? Is not of that which thou esteem'st an ornament of life. Live a coward in thine own esteem, yet I dare not wait upon I would, like a poor cat of the adage.
Give me peace. I dare do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is not.
What beast was then that made you break this enterprise to me? When you durst do it, then you were a man. And to be more than what you were, you would be so much more the man. No time nor place did then adhere, and yet you would make folks. They have made themselves. And that's their business now. Does unmake you? I have given suck, and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this.
If we should fail,
We say, but screw your courage to the sticking place, and we'll not fail. When Duncan is asleep, where to the Bardish on his day's hard journey, soundly advise him. His two chamberlains will I, with wine and wassail, so convince that memory, the warder of the brain, shall be a thing, and the receipt of reason a limbeck only, when in swinish sleep. Their drenched natures lie as in their death. What cannot you and I perform upon the unguarded Duncan? What not put upon his spongy officers, who shall bear the guilt of our great query?
bring forth men children only. For thy undaunted mettle should compose nothing but males. Will it not be received, when we have marked with blood those sleepy two of his own chambers, and used their very daggers that they have done?
Who dares receive each other? That we shall make our griefs and clamour war upon his death.
I am settled, and bend up each corporal agent to this terrible feat. Away! and mock the kind with fairest show. False face must hide what the false heart doth know.
Okay, we're now going to focus on two key speeches made by these characters in this scene and look really closely at that language. So first of all, I'm going to read it, then we're going to go through a simplified translated version of the Shakespearean language, and then you're going to be thinking a bit about what this speech reveals about this character. Firstly, we're going to have a look at this speech by Macbeth. This is the bit where he explains his reasons to kill Duncan. And he says, "First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. Then, as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan has borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued, against the deep damnation of his taking off. And pity, like a naked new-born babe, striding the blast, or heaven's cherubim, horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself, and falls on the other." So let's go through the translation. First of all, I am his kinsman and his subject, so I should always try to protect him. Second, I am his host, so I should be closing the door in his murderous face, not trying to murder him myself. Besides, Duncan has been such a humble leader, so free of corruption, that his virtuous legacy will speak for him when he dies, as if angels were playing trumpets against the injustice of his murder. And pity, like an innocent newborn baby, will ride the wind with winged angels on invisible horses through the air to spread news of the horrible deeds to everyone, everywhere. People will shed a flood of tears that will drown the wind like a horrible downpour of rain. I can't spur myself to action. The only thing motivating me is ambition, which makes people rush ahead of themselves towards disaster. So take a moment, pause the video. I'd like you to write down 3 separate ideas. What does this speech reveal about Macbeth? About what he's thinking, about why he's acting, and about perhaps how he's feeling. Now let's go through a few things that you could have picked up on. So, first of all, this whole speech shows that Macbeth is actually quite a rational person. He's got a difficult decision to make, and so he takes the time to think clearly and carefully about what he should do. He's weighing up the pros and cons, weighing up his reasons. That makes him appear like quite a reasonable, rational person. So he lists his reasons. Firstly, and he makes it clear in this first section that he understands his duty as a subject to the king. Remember, we've talked about the noble order of society in Jacobean England. He is a nobleman and he owes duty to his king, which means that he shouldn't be murdering him. That's what he means when he talks about being his subject. He also reveals that he understands the personal relationship that he has with Duncan. He's his host, and therefore he should be the person who's protecting him, not the person who's bearing the knife himself, who's actually doing the murder. He also reveals that he has great respect for Duncan. He appreciates his goodness and his virtues, that he has borne his faculties so meek, that he's so humble and so good. And that means that this deed was even more evil than murder would be otherwise. In fact, what Macbeth is showing here is he understands that he's effectively murdering an innocent. He compares it to the murder of newborn babes. What he's showing here is he recognizes and is very clear-sighted and honest about the fact that this is a deeply evil deed. He calls it a horrid deed that will create pity. And then he comes to his conclusion. He's showing admirable self-awareness here, at least in my opinion, because he realizes that the only reason he has to actually kill Duncan is his own ambition to be king, his only vaulting ambition. He essentially recognizes that this is an entirely selfish motive, and also one that shouldn't be trusted. Ambition which overleaps itself and falls on the other. The idea that ambition, in jumping forward, might actually lead to a fall the other side. So Macbeth here is actually being fairly reasonable. Let's move on now to have a look at Lady Macbeth. After Macbeth has said that he will not go ahead and kill Duncan, she says this: "What beast was it, then, that made you break this enterprise to me? When you durst do it, then you were a man. And to be more than what you were, you would be so much more the man. Nor time nor place did then adhere, and yet you would make both. They have made themselves, and that their fitness now doth unmake you. I have given suck, and know how tender it is to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums, and dashed the brains out, so had I sworn as you have done to this." So let's go through this in slightly simplified text. If you weren't a man, then what kind of animal were you when you first told me you wanted to do this? When you dared to do it, that's when you were a man. And if you go one step further by doing what you dared to do before, you'll be that much more the man. The time and place weren't right before, but you would have gone ahead with the murder anyhow. Now the time and place are just right, but they're almost too good for you. I have suckled a baby, and I know how sweet it is to love the baby at my breast. But even as the baby was smiling up at me, I would have plucked my nipple from out of its mouth and smashed its brains out against a wall if I had sworn to do that the same way as you have sworn to do this. So it's quite powerful stuff. Again, your question is this: what does this reveal about Lady Macbeth? You need to write down 3 clear answers about what this speech is showing about her as a character. Pause the video now to give yourself some time to do this. Okay, let's go through a few things that you could have concentrated on. What this speech immediately shows is how aggressive and furious her response is to any sort of resistance or objection. You can see here that she talks about breaking this enterprise with me. It's as if she thinks that this is a breach of trust of some sort. This is the idea that they had an agreement before, whereas actually they really didn't. Macbeth had never clearly agreed to her plan. She's extremely judgmental and critical of Macbeth, and she immediately goes for the throat. She sees his refusal to act as undermining his entire identity as a man. She's being extremely insulting and deeply, deeply personal here. He has this idea that he's almost being unmade by this, that by refusing to do this act, he's somehow betraying himself. She says that explicitly. You are unmade. You would no longer be yourself. She also shows here that she's absolutely pitiless. She, in contrast to Macbeth, doesn't talk about Duncan or his goodness at all. She acknowledges in no way that he doesn't deserve this to happen to him at all. And she also shows how entirely ruthless she is. This last section, there's a hugely shocking image. She's admitting here that at some stage she's had a child, and we have to assume, because the child isn't mentioned at any other point in the play, that that baby has since died. But she is saying that she would be willing to kill an innocent. She would be willing to kill her own child while that child was taking milk from her breast, if she had sworn to do it. What she's doing here is she is showing how utterly and completely determined she is, that her ambition and her determination override absolutely everything else. Next, we're going to have a think about Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's relationship. To do that, we're going to have a look at 3 key quotes. So, you're going to have a look at this first one now. What are we learning from Macbeth saying this about Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's relationship? He says, "We will proceed no further in this business. He hath honoured me of late, and I have bought golden opinions from all sorts of people, which would be worn now in their newest gloss, not cast aside so soon." So I'll just explain this quickly. He is essentially saying that we cannot go on any further in this business. He's not going to go ahead with it. He won't kill Duncan. He says that the king has honoured him of late. He's given him a new title, the Thane of Cawdor. And that means that he has bought a good opinion, the golden opinions from all sorts of people. He's respected. He has a good reputation, which needs to be enjoyed now, not cast aside or ruined by committing murder. So what I'd like you to do now is pause the video and write down 3 different things that we learn or you could discuss about Lady Macbeth's relationship with Macbeth. Similarly to yesterday, you need to look at specific language choices that Macbeth is making here. What is it about what he actually says, his word choice, that shows us what their relationship is like? Pause the video to give yourself some time to think. So here are some things you could have focused on. By saying "we will," Macbeth is attempting to take control of the relationship. He's attempting to show that he's in charge. He's making a decision. We will not do this. By saying that he has been honoured of late, he is essentially trying to justify his decision by arguing that Duncan has treated him well. This is actually quite a selfish motive if you think about it, saying that you shouldn't murder someone because they've just been nice to you. But we also have to wonder, is this actually one of Macbeth's reasons? We've just heard him describing his reasons not to kill Duncan aloud, and he never mentioned this one, which tells us maybe a little bit about how he's trying to manipulate Lady Macbeth into agreeing with him. He also talks about the golden opinions from all sorts of people. Here, he's essentially justifying his decision by arguing that he doesn't want to spoil his reputation, which again is not something that he mentioned when he was speaking out loud on his own. So, if we're going to think about Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's relationship, is he giving reasons that he thinks will persuade Lady Macbeth rather than his real reasons? And what does it tell us about their relationship that he would hide his real reasons, which are, after all, a deep sense of pity for Duncan and a deep sense of admiration for his virtues? We can also note from this quote that he's not being aggressive. He's explaining his reasons. He's being very reasonable. And also, he doesn't criticize her at all, which we cannot say for what Lady Macbeth then says in response to him. Here's your second quote. Lady Macbeth responds to Macbeth saying he won't kill Duncan, and she immediately goes on the attack. "Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? Hath it slept since, and it wakes now to look so green and pale at what it did so freely?" So what she's saying here is, were you drunk when you were so hopeful before about your chances of killing Duncan? Have you gone to sleep and woken up again, looking all pale and afraid, in fear of the idea of killing him? Take a moment and pause the video. Again, you're looking to write down 3 things. What are we learning about Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's relationship from this quote? Here are a few things you could have talked about. First of all, Lady Macbeth responds to Macbeth's decision with a series of aggressive, demanding questions. She doesn't pause between the questions to allow him to answer. It's almost like machine gun fire. She immediately goes on the offensive. By using the word hope to describe the willingness or confidence in the ability to kill Duncan, she's showing that her ambition for power is still driving her. By using the word drunk, she's questioning his self-control and his ability to think clearly at all. Again, she's looking to control and dominate this relationship. We also need to question, was he actually that hopeful before? He never actually agreed that he was going to kill Duncan. He never actually said anything hopeful about it. So isn't she being a little bit manipulative by trying to suggest that he's changed his mind? By using the words pale and green, she's attacking Macbeth. Again, she's going on the offensive. By suggesting that he looks green and pale at the thought of killing Duncan, she's drawing this image of him as someone who's weak and sickly, almost ill at the idea, and deeply, deeply afraid and cowardly. We can see here that she immediately starts to attack him. She essentially turns what he starts off as a debate into an argument. She also doesn't respond to any of the reasons he has given. She's ignoring and overriding him. This is your third and final quote. After Lady Macbeth has explained her plan to kill Duncan, this is what Macbeth says in response. Bring forth men children only, for thy undaunted mettle shall compose of nothing but males. What he's saying by bring forth is you should only give birth to male children, because your undaunted mettle, your fearless spirit, can create nothing that it isn't masculine. So, same question. What are we learning about Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's relationship here? What do they think of each other, and how is he treating her? Pause the video to give yourself time to write down your ideas. So here are a few things you could have thought about. This phrase, bring forth. This is continuing Lady Macbeth's focus on gender. Remember when she was saying that when you durst do it, then you were a man. He's continuing this theme by bringing up her female ability to have children. By describing her as having undaunted mettle, so fearless spirit and courage, he seems to suggest that he actually admires her determination and her ambition to kill Duncan. And by saying that she should create nothing but male children, Macbeth is sort of suggesting that Lady Macbeth has a lot of male qualities within her herself. And by that, he seems to be suggesting that she's full of strength, courage, and that in a very key way, she is capable of wielding great power herself. Macbeth is revealing here an awful lot about what he thinks of his wife, and also whether he thinks that's a good thing or not. He's responding to her tirade of insults and her insistent, aggressive, hectoring tone by essentially complimenting her. So, we've got to ask ourselves, is he accepting here that she's the dominant one in this relationship? Does he actually agree about what it takes to be a man? Finally, we're going to have a think about this. Why is it, do you think, that Macbeth agrees to murder Duncan? So we get to the end of scene 7, and Macbeth says to Lady Macbeth that they're going to go through with it. And they leave, essentially, to start carrying out their plan. But given Macbeth had started off the scene by making it entirely clear that the only reason he's actually got to kill him is ambition, and that that's not good enough, what changes his mind during that conversation? Pause the video for a moment. I'd like you to challenge yourself to write 2 different ideas. What are 2 possible reasons why Macbeth has changed his mind? Okay, Here are a few possibilities. Now note, none of these are the sole answer. This is all about our interpretation of the play, not what the actual written in stone answer might be. So we have to use words like perhaps or might when we're discussing this sort of question. So, perhaps Macbeth's lust and wish for ambition has actually just got the better of him. Perhaps he's seen Lady Macbeth's passion and her determination and realized that actually he's just as ambitious as her, and he really wants the crown. Perhaps the fact that Lady Macbeth has been insulting his masculinity means that he now needs to he feels like he has to prove himself. He needs to prove his masculine identity. And in her terms, that means that he needs to be willing to take power for himself, to do whatever it takes. But perhaps, actually, he's not really persuaded by Lady Macbeth at all. Perhaps he's afraid to appear weak in front of her. And so as a result, he said he's going to go ahead with the murder, but he's actually secretly still harboring some doubts. And also, perhaps, he's ashamed of his ability to pity Duncan and recognize his virtues. Macbeth does genuinely pity Duncan. He sees him as an innocent. He sees him as a good man. We know that because he says so when he's talking aloud at the start of the scene. He doesn't mention that as a reason to refuse to act to his wife, which suggests that he's hiding it. Perhaps he's actually ashamed of this part of his character, and so he's actually going to go ahead with it, really to try and prove himself in another way, to try and hide that quality. That is it for today. Have a brilliant weekend. You'll be moving on with Macbeth next Monday. Thanks very much.